So in this video, we're going to look at why certain goods that may be sold will not be considered in the GDP of that year. So the two main reasons why certain goods are not considered in GDP is either it's too complicated to measure them, or they're not actually produced in that given year. Those are the two main reasons. So let's just go with too complicated to measure. Well, too complicated to measure could be a series of things. It could be if you decide to make a home-cooked meal instead of going to the restaurant. Well, going to the restaurant, it's really easy to see how much you spent on that meal. If you do a home-cooked meal, they'll be able to see how much you spent on the various ingredients at the grocery store. That gets counted, yes. But the value added in terms of the time and everything else that makes maybe $10 in ingredients equivalent to $30 at the restaurant, well, that's not counted. So if you were a chef at a restaurant and now you start being a chef at home instead, might not work so well because it's not as full time. But let's say you go from being a school teacher to homeschooling your kids, and you work the same amount of work week and everything else. Well, when you're a teacher, that money that you earn is recorded. When you're at home and you're not paying someone to school your kids, but you're not receiving a revenue either, well, then that's non-recorded activities. So the reason why that's not counted in GDP is just it's very complicated to measure all of that, to measure how much value you're adding to different things as you're mowing your own lawn versus hiring someone, and so on and so forth. Unrecorded activities, just hard to measure. That's the first reason that certain goods that could be recorded in GDP aren't. They're still produced, like you're still cutting your lawn, you're still making food and so on, but they're not counted. It's because they're just too hard to count. And then you have the categories of goods that are legal goods. So if you buy certain products out of a black market, so whether it's illegal products like drugs, or it could just be hiring someone to cut your lawn, but you're not declaring it, well, that's also seen as illegal. Well, in both of those situations, the government has no trace of that, so that's not recorded either. And then you could think about goods that are not produced in that given year. So if you buy a secondhand car, secondhand house, all of those things will not count in GDP either, even though it's amount of money that you're spending. It doesn't count because if you buy a car that's 5 years old, that car was produced 5 years ago. If it was produced in your country, it contributed to your GDP 5 years ago. But every time that car changes ownership, we're not reproducing a car. We're not creating more value, because at the end of the day, with GDP, we're trying to evaluate the value of the goods produced in a given year. Same kind of complication can happen if you produce, let's say, a computer in a year, but it's only sold the subsequent year. Well, it should be recorded the year it was produced, not the year that it was sold. So that's where you get into within the inventory or the investment category, you have inventory accumulation. Well, that's what it would count. You would say, well, in that year that was produced, that value will be added in inventory, and that's going to count in GDP. And as the inventory falls and consumption rises the next year, well, that kind of balances off, which leads to no contribution to GDP. Some of the things that you don't really need to know precisely, but if you're asking yourself, if you own a house, the government will typically try to evaluate how much that would cost, or a condo, how much would it cost to rent it, to account for that value and account for all the other values of people paying on rent. That's something else in there. But if we keep to the simple examples, it's how much money is being spent on goods that are produced in that given year. Just think about it that way. Like, the easiest way I think about GDP is I try to think about what's the total value of all the goods produced in a country in a given year. As soon as it's not produced in that year, or as soon as we can't find the data for it, or that it's not recorded because people are doing it at their own house, well, in all of those situations, they're not recorded, therefore they don't contribute towards GDP. Hope this was interesting. Catch you in the next one. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.